What if the biggest mistake of your life turned out to be the one thing that saved you? When a struggling single dad accidentally sends his grieving daughter to the wrong summer camp, he expects complaints, chaos, or at best, a refund. Instead, she returns transformed, smiling again, carrying stories of a mysterious woman who changed everything. And when he follows her footsteps back to the woods, he finds not just the camp, but the one person who might heal them both. This is a story about second chances, quiet miracles, and the kind of love that doesn't arrive with fireworks, but stays for good. If you believe in the power of kindness, hope, and stories that touch the heart, don't forget to subscribe and join us on this unforgettable journey. Now, let's begin. The Kindness Camp. The application form had been open on Graham Adler's laptop for 3 days, blinking in the corner of his cluttered screen like a guilt trip he hadn't signed up for. Summer camp. Just the thought made his stomach tighten. He rubbed his temples, staring at the digital flyer. STEM Ahead, a camp for future coders. It promised robotics, coding, and science adventures, everything his late wife would have chosen for Maisie. Everything he had no clue about. But it was structured, safe, predictable. That had to count for something. He glanced toward the living room. Maisie, 10 years old and far too quiet for her age, sat curled up with a book, her blonde hair half falling into her cereal bowl. Her legs dangled off the couch like she didn't belong to the world around her, and in many ways she didn't. Not since June last year. Graham's throat tightened. He turned back to the screen, clicked Submit, and shut the laptop with a satisfying snap. It wasn't until 3 days later, when the welcome packet arrived in the mail, that Graham realized he'd made a mistake. Not STEM Ahead, Kindred Camp. He read the brochure twice, thinking maybe it was a sponsorship name or a sub-program. It wasn't. This camp didn't offer coding or robotics. It offered forest breathing, compassion circles, and something called a memory grove. It used phrases like healing through connection and grief-informed programming. The welcome letter was handwritten and signed, with gentle hope, Wren Callahan. Graham stared at the signature like it had insulted him. What kind of camp sends handwritten letters? Maisie walked into the kitchen and picked up the envelope. Is that for me? He hesitated. It was supposed to be a science camp. She pulled out the brochure and scanned the pictures. Children sitting in hammocks, painting rocks, writing letters to someone off-frame. Her eyes lit up, just a flicker. I like trees, she said softly. Graham frowned. Maisie, this isn't robotics. This is... He paused, flipping through pages filled with images of barefoot kids planting wildflowers. It's feelings, and hugging, and pine cones. Maisie looked up. Can I go? He blinked. You want to? She shrugged. It looks quiet. That stopped him. She hadn't said she wanted anything in months, not new shoes, not screen time, not even dessert. You really want to go to this kindred place? He asked. She nodded once. Mom liked trees too. And that was it, that one line. They arrived at Kindred Camp 2 weeks later, tucked away in a pine-shaded valley 2 hours north of Seattle. The dirt road leading to the entrance was so narrow, Graham had to reverse twice to let a Subaru pass. His truck looked absurd among the rows of hybrids and minivans. A woman in her late 30s stood under a string of handmade paper lanterns, waving at new arrivals. She had curly auburn hair pulled into a loose braid, freckles across her nose, and wore a sun-faded shirt that read, "Kindness is contagious." "Welcome to Kindred," she called warmly. "You must be Maisie." Maisie nodded shyly and half hid behind Graham. He extended a hand out of reflex. "I'm Graham Adler, her dad." She shook it gently. "Wren Callahan. I run the emotional wellness programming here. Of course she does, Graham thought. Her voice was like warm honey in a cold cup. Don't worry, she added, noting his skeptical expression. We don't force anyone to sing Kumbaya. Maisie cracked a smile at that. The check-in process was seamless, which somehow made Graham feel worse. He'd expected chaos, tears, a last-minute change of heart. But Maisie rolled her suitcase down the gravel path like she belonged here. The camp had that effect. It was absurdly peaceful. Birds chirped. Wind moved through tall pines like breath. No one was shouting. No one was rushing. When Maisie spotted a girl showing others how to make flower crowns near the pond, she paused. Then she looked at him and said, "You can go now, Dad." Graham blinked. Already? Maisie nodded, gripping her little backpack. You'll pick me up next Friday, right? He crouched down. Of course I will. She leaned in, kissed his cheek, and added, softly, Don't forget to smile sometimes. I miss it. That broke him. He waved goodbye and turned before she could see the tears prickling behind his eyes. As he reached his truck, Wren was there again, leaning casually against the fence. She's a remarkable kid, she said. Graham gave a half smile. She lost her mom last summer. I thought so, Wren said quietly. A lot of our campers have that look, like they're still listening for footsteps that won't come. He looked at her then, really looked. There was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. I didn't mean to sign her up here, he admitted. It was a mistake. Some of the best things are, she said with a soft smile. We've built this place on those. Graham didn't know why, but he lingered another 5 minutes before getting in the truck. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Wren Callahan had long ago learned that the real magic of Kindred Camp wasn't in the pine trees or the fresh air. It was in the silences. The kinds of silences that weren't empty, but full of ache, of memory, of kids too young to grieve, and parents too tired to admit they were grieving too. That morning, as she moved through the check-in crowd with her clipboard and easy smile, Wren felt the subtle shift in the wind that always came with the first day of camp, a mix of anticipation and invisible weight. The unspoken question every child seemed to bring. Will I be okay here? And then there was Maisie. Wren had noticed her immediately. Her quiet posture. The way she scanned the campgrounds like a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. But she also noticed how the girl's hand remained steady in her father's. No tight grip, no panic, just presence. A bond, frayed, but not broken. And then there was the father. Graham Adler had the look of a man who'd stopped looking. Not just at camp brochures or calendars, but at people. His expression was polite, distant. The kind of man who thought silence was strength and didn't know what to do with kindness when it showed up in a sun-faded t-shirt and sandals. But when Maisie kissed his cheek and whispered something that made his shoulders cave in just slightly, Wren knew. They were both trying. That was enough. By late afternoon, the camp had settled into its rhythm. Luggage found cabins, kids found snacks, and counselors gently nudged even the most introverted toward watercolor kits and rope swings. Wren sat at her usual table outside the main lodge, a thermos of peppermint tea in hand, when she noticed Maisie again, perched on a wooden bench under the dogwood tree, sketching in a small notebook. Alone. Content. Nearby, a boy named Leo, a sweet, nonverbal 9-year-old who only communicated through laminated flashcards, approached with his counselor. His card read, "Can I sit next to you?" Maisie read it, smiled, and scooted over without a word. That moment, Wren thought, was the kind of thing no curriculum could teach. Across town, Graham sat in the driveway of their home in Bellevue, the truck engine still running. He hadn't planned to feel this displaced. The house felt emptier than usual. Not just quiet, but hollow. The absence of Maisie's presence was like a missing tooth he couldn't stop tonguing. He walked into the living room, looked at her blanket on the couch, and then turned right around and walked back out. Dinner was microwave soup. He ate half, then poured the rest down the sink. He turned on the TV, scrolled through shows he didn't care about, then finally opened his laptop. Just to look, he told himself. He typed in Kindred Camp and clicked on the website. It was simple. Hand-drawn icons, soft colors, a banner that read, "Where healing grows in the wild." He clicked on Our Team. Wren's photo was there, smiling beneath a canopy of trees, barefoot and holding a clipboard. Wren Callahan, Emotional Wellness Director, former palliative care nurse, grief-informed specialist, believer in wildflowers and second chances. He read it 3 times, then closed the laptop. Wildflowers and second chances? He didn't believe in either. Back at Kindred, dinner was a lively affair. Children sat at long wooden tables beneath string lights, passing baskets of cornbread and bowls of baked chili. The air buzzed with stories, clinking spoons and shy laughter. Maisie sat with Leo and 2 other girls. She hadn't spoken much, but her eyes were open wider than they had been in weeks. She noticed things. The woven napkin holders, the scent of lavender in the butter, the way Leo's counselor tapped twice when food arrived so he'd know it was time to eat. Across the lodge, Wren watched discreetly. Her job wasn't to hover, it was to hold space, and Maisie was unfolding, slowly. After dinner, the children gathered around a bonfire for the first kindness circle. It wasn't mandatory, just gently encouraged. They passed a carved wooden stone shaped like a heart, and whoever held it could say something kind they'd noticed that day. When it reached Maisie, she hesitated. Wren was about to step in when Maisie spoke, barely above a whisper. "Leo let me borrow his green pencil," she said. "It was the exact color I needed for the moss." The other kids nodded, and Leo beamed. No one clapped, no one forced praise. They simply moved on, and Wren felt something shift. That night, in her small cabin tucked behind the craft barn, Wren lit a single candle and opened the worn leather journal she'd been keeping since the first summer of Kindred. Not for data, not for staff reports, but for memory. She wrote, "Maisie Adler, tree sketcher, quiet strength." Her father, guarded, tired, but present. Feels like they're both waiting for permission to heal. She paused, pen in midair, then added, "Keep an eye on this one. Maybe start with dogwood." Graham lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning shadows across his walls. He thought of the campfire, of Maisie's whisper, "Don't forget to smile sometimes." I miss it. He didn't smile, but he did close his eyes. And for the first time in a long while, he let the silence stay. Graham hadn't meant to return to Kindred so soon. He told himself it was logistical, practical. He wanted to double-check Maisie's meds made it into the right hands, confirm her sleeping arrangement, and make sure the place wasn't too strange. After all, there were no surveillance cameras, no digital check-ins, no Wi-Fi, no screens, just handwritten signs and counselors who wore beaded bracelets and used words like intentional space. It was unsettling, but truthfully, he couldn't get that woman's voice out of his head. We've built this place on mistakes. It was too honest, too disarming, and it had stayed with him like the scent of wood smoke on a jacket, subtle but impossible to ignore. He arrived late in the afternoon, unannounced. The gravel crunched under his boots as he stepped onto the main path, greeted only by the occasional warble of birds and the distant laughter of children somewhere beyond the trees. He found Wren by the central fire pit, stacking logs in preparation for that evening's storytelling circle. She wore a denim shirt rolled to the elbows, her hair loosely tied, a pencil tucked behind one ear. Sunlight poured through the pines behind her, haloing her in a kind of accidental grace. She looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Mr. Adler," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Back so soon?" He cleared his throat. "Graham's fine. I just figured I should make sure everything's squared away with Maisie." "She's doing beautifully," Wren said. "You'd be proud." "I'm always proud," he replied, a bit too quickly, then softened. "I just don't always know what I'm doing." Wren smiled in that slow, unhurried way of people who understood pain intimately. "Well," she said, gesturing toward a bench near the fire, "I've found most people here don't. That's why they come." They sat, a polite space between them, and listened to the sound of the wind moving through pine needles. Wren reached down, picked up a twig, and snapped it absently between her fingers. "I used to be a nurse," she said after a long pause. "In palliative care." Graham turned to her. "End of life?" She nodded. 5 years. Then I stopped." "Why?" She considered for a moment. "You can only hold so many hands as they go. Before you realize no one ever taught you what to do after. I was good at the going part, not so good at the staying. That's honest. I don't do much pretending anymore," she said simply. Graham leaned forward, elbows on knees. "My wife, Lena, she was diagnosed 2 years ago. Pancreatic. We fought. Chemo, trials, more chemo, and then one day, fighting felt crueler than stopping, so we stopped." Wren didn't flinch, didn't rush to say something comforting. She just let his words settle like ash. "Maisie was 8 then," Graham continued. "She watched it all, but she never cried, not once, not even at the funeral. She was probably protecting you." The words hit harder than he expected. "You think so? I've seen it before," Wren said. "Children who stay strong for their parents, because no one ever tells them it's okay to fall apart." He swallowed. "She's stronger than I am." Wren smiled again, gentler this time. "Maybe, or maybe she's just waiting for you to go first." A silence followed, the kind that isn't awkward but sacred, like the stillness of a chapel when no one's speaking but everyone's praying. In the distance, a bell rang softly. "Evening circle," Wren said, standing. "You're welcome to stay. There's no pressure to speak." Graham hesitated. "Do the parents come?" "Sometimes, when they're brave." He looked at her. "Do I strike you as brave?" "No," she said, matter of fact. "But I think you're tired of being afraid." The fire crackled low as campers and staff gathered in a loose ring around it, each person wrapped in a blanket or sitting cross-legged on old cushions. Graham stood toward the back, half in shadow. Maisie sat across the circle with Leo, their heads close as they whispered about something on her sketchpad. Wren stood to speak. "Tonight we're telling stories," she said. "Not big stories, not perfect ones, just the kind that live inside us, waiting to be named." She looked around the circle. "I'll start." Wren shared a story about a boy named Jack, age 7, who had wanted to be a firefighter. He'd passed away from leukemia and in his final days had asked her, his nurse, to teach him how to make s'mores in his hospital room. "So we did," she said. "With a candle and a coat hanger and a bar of chocolate we weren't supposed to have." The circle laughed gently, and afterward, when he was drifting off, he whispered, "You can be part of my family now." She looked down at the flames. "I still remember how that marshmallow tasted. It tasted like permission." No one spoke for a long moment. Then the next child began. Graham didn't speak, but he listened, really listened. And when it was over and the circle dispersed, Maisie crossed the clearing and took his hand. Just took it. No words. He felt the smallest squeeze. It was nothing. It was everything. The next morning brought a fog that settled low between the pines, like the forest itself was taking a deep breath before speaking. Graham hadn't planned to stay the night, but after the fire circle, something inside him refused to leave. He told himself it was for Maisie, that she might need him, that maybe he could help, but the truth was simpler. He needed this. He needed the quiet, the fire, the strangers who spoke more truth in an hour than he had in a year. He needed the space to feel without apologizing for it. And so he stayed. At breakfast, Maisie sat across from Leo, quietly eating oatmeal while sketching in her notebook. Graham joined her at the long wooden table, unsure if he'd be welcome. She glanced up, her spoon mid-air, and offered him the smallest of smiles. "You stayed." "I did." "Did you sleep in a bunk?" "Sort of. Wren found me a spare cot in the staff cabin." Maisie nodded, then turned the page in her sketchbook. On it was a rough outline of the fire circle from the night before. Glowing embers, soft outlines of people, and a shadowy figure at the back with a familiar slouch. Graham blinked. "Is that me?" Maisie shrugged. "You looked kind of lonely." He cleared his throat. "I was listening." "I know," she said. "That's why I drew you there." Later that day, Wren led the camp in one of its most sacred activities, letters to the sky. Campers were given quiet time, no talking, no group work, to sit with pen and paper and write a letter to someone they missed, someone gone, someone whose absence still made the world feel lopsided. Some wrote to parents, others to siblings, grandparents, even pets. The only rule was, be honest. Wren explained it gently. You don't have to read it, you don't have to share it, but you do have to write it like they're still listening. Graham stood at the edge of the outdoor gathering space, watching as the children spread out under trees, beside the lake, or in hammocks strung between cabins. Maisie chose the foot of the oldest pine tree on the property, one Wren called the listening tree. She sat cross-legged in the moss, letter in her lap, pencil unmoving for a long time. Graham wanted to look away, but he didn't. Wren approached him quietly. She carried a leather satchel filled with paper, pencils, and tissues. "You don't have to write one," she said. "I wasn't planning to." She tilted her head. "That's usually a sign you should." He offered a dry smile. "I've already said goodbye, too many times." Wren didn't argue. She simply handed him a folded sheet of paper and walked away. He didn't sit under a tree. He sat on the cabin steps, paper on his knee, pencil in hand, and stared. For 20 minutes, nothing came. Then, slowly, painfully, he began, "Dear Lena, Maisie drew me last night, at the fire. She said I looked lonely. I guess I did. I keep waiting for the grief to go somewhere, to drain out or fade, but it just keeps reshaping itself. It sits in the corners of her room, in your handwriting on recipe cards, in the way I don't know how to braid her hair or answer her silence. You would have loved this place, trees and messy feelings and kids who make you want to try harder. Maisie's smiling more here. She made a friend. She's still quiet, but it's not the brittle kind. It's the kind that listens, like you used to. I don't know what I'm doing, but I think maybe that's okay now. Lava." He stared at the letter for a long time, and then, without planning it, he folded it in thirds, looked up at the pale morning sky, and whispered, "Here." He let the wind carry the words. That evening, the camp held a quiet ceremony by the lake. The sun had already dipped below the treetops, casting gold across the water's surface. Campers placed their folded letters in small wooden boats, each one carved by past campers, lovingly decorated with names and stars and swirling patterns. The boats were pushed gently into the lake, candles lit inside each, creating a constellation of light floating across the water. Maisie's boat was blue with silver swirls. She stood barefoot at the shore, silent, watching it drift. Graham stood behind her, unsure if he should speak. After a long pause, she said, "I wrote about the garden." He blinked. "The one behind the house?" She nodded. "I told her the marigolds came back, even though I forgot to water them." Graham felt something twist in his chest. "That's a good thing to tell her." Maisie turned to him. "What did you write?" He hesitated. "That I miss her, and that you're still her favorite person." Maisie didn't smile, but her shoulders loosened. She reached for his hand again. They stood like that, side by side, watching the lights drift toward the horizon. No words, just sky and letters, and maybe, just maybe, something listening. The morning sun crept slowly across the kitchen floor of the main lodge, catching flecks of flour floating in the air like soft snowfall. Wren stood barefoot at the stove, a spatula in one hand, her hair in a messy twist that had clearly lost the war with sleep. On the griddle, pancakes sizzled, imperfectly round, gloriously uneven, some with blueberries that had burst into purple blotches, others plain as promise. "Flip too early, and they sulk," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Graham, standing behind her in a camp apron 2 sizes too small, raised an eyebrow. "You talk to your pancakes?" "Only the difficult ones," he smirked. "That explains why they don't like me. I flipped one too early, and it folded in half like a sad omelet." Wren chuckled, handing him a fresh ladle of batter. "We don't aim for perfection here. We aim for joy. And maybe breakfast." It was his 3rd morning back at Kindred. He hadn't planned to stay this long, but neither Wren nor the other staff seemed to mind. When he offered to help in the kitchen, Wren had simply handed him an apron and said, "Hope you like fire alarms?" There was something about cooking that calmed him. Maybe it was the simplicity of it. Ingredients, heat, transformation, a quiet kind of alchemy. You couldn't overthink grief while measuring flour. The kids began trickling into the lodge in pairs and sleepy clusters, still rubbing eyes and tugging on sweatshirts. The air filled with the sweet scent of cinnamon and maple syrup, and the low murmur of a new day beginning. Maisie arrived with Leo, both carrying pine cones. Wren spotted them and grinned. "Pine cone pancakes?" she asked. Maisie shook her head. "Campfire craft later. We're making tiny boats." "Eco-friendly," Leo's counselor added with a smile. Graham watched his daughter quietly. There was color in her cheeks again, a little more spring in her step. She laughed when Leo mimed the pine cone sinking dramatically into a pretend ocean of syrup. And Graham, without meaning to, laughed too. After breakfast, Wren poured them both coffee and led him outside to the back porch, where the sun warmed the wooden railing and birds flitted in the brush. "Maisie's changing," she said, sipping from a mug that read, "Grief makes artists of us all." "I see it in the way she's drawing. Her lines are lighter, her colors more curious." Graham nodded slowly. "I see it too." "And you?" Wren asked. He blinked. "What about me? You seem less brittle." He exhaled, watching a squirrel dart through the grass. "I think I forgot how to laugh. Not because I didn't want to, I just didn't remember the shape of it anymore." Wren tilted her head. "And now?" "Now I'm burning pancakes with a woman who talks to them." She laughed again, this time not softly but fully, and he found himself watching her, not the trees. There was something in her presence that didn't just invite honesty, it demanded it. Not forcefully, but with such gentle constancy that it felt wrong not to offer it. He hesitated, then said, "Lena used to sing while she cooked. Off-key, terrible stuff, Fleetwood Mac, James Taylor, Really bad renditions. Wren smiled. I bet Maisie loved that. She'd roll her eyes and pretend to hate it, but the first time I cooked without music. The silence hurt. A long pause passed between them, filled only by the soft rustle of wind and bird song. Wren set down her mug. I lost someone, too. Graham looked at her. I was engaged once, she continued. He had ALS, diagnosed at 33. We had a year before it got bad. I stayed through it, through all of it. He didn't speak, just listened. And when it was over, Wren said, voice softening, I didn't know what to do with the part of me that only existed in his presence. The version of me that made him laugh. That read to him. That watched sunsets with him when he couldn't talk anymore. She turned to him. Grief doesn't just take the person. It takes the version of you who existed with them. Graham swallowed, throat tight. That's it. That's exactly it. The pine trees swayed gently in the wind like they were nodding in agreement. For a long time, neither of them spoke. And it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Two people sitting with their brokenness like it was a third companion on the bench, one neither of them had invited, but both had finally stopped trying to push away. Do you ever think about starting over? Graham asked. Wren turned to him slowly. Not in the romantic comedy, fireworks kind of way, he clarified. Just having someone beside you, again. She looked out toward the forest. Sometimes, she said, but I don't want someone to fix me. I want someone to sit beside me in the undone parts and not flinch. Graham nodded. Yeah, me too. They shared a look, quiet, curious, unrushed. Something old in both of them cracked just slightly, and light came in. That afternoon, during the camp's outdoor session, Graham stayed behind to clean the griddle. Wren returned later to find 2 pancakes on a plate. One shaped like a dog. One shaped like a crooked heart. She laughed. I see you've mastered the language of carbs. He handed her the plate. I figured if I can't say the right thing, I might as well cook it. Wren took the heart. You said enough. And they ate, side by side on the back steps, warm sun on their backs, pine needles in their shoes, and, for the first time in a very long time, hope in their hearts. The path to the memory grove was narrow, lined with ferns and the kind of moss that made everything look older than it was. The air held a stillness, not of silence but of reverence, as if the trees themselves had learned to listen. Maisie walked beside Leo, holding a small dogwood sapling wrapped in burlap. Leo held his own, a delicate cedar no taller than his forearm. The rest of the camp followed in pairs, each child cradling a sapling like a secret. Wren led them with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked this trail many times, her steps familiar, her presence anchoring. Behind the group, Graham trailed slightly. Not because he didn't want to be there, but because something about this place felt too close, too exposed. He had been in cemeteries. He had held Lena's hand in sterile hospital rooms. He had nodded politely to condolence cards and made casseroles for church memorials. But this quiet pilgrimage into a sun-dappled grove with children and trees, unsettled him in a different way. It felt honest. The clearing opened gradually, revealing a natural amphitheater surrounded by towering trees and marked by dozens of small wooden nameplates, each one nestled beside a growing sapling. Names carved by hand. Messages inked in permanent marker, some in shaky child handwriting, others etched with care and tears. Graham's breath caught in his throat. Maisie's eyes scanned the grove, pausing on the messages. To Grandma Jo, who smelled like peppermint. For Benny, who always let me go first. I miss your laugh, Mom. Wren knelt near the center of the grove, setting down her shovel. "This is a place of memory," she said gently. "Not of endings, but of beginnings. Every tree planted here is a way to say, 'You mattered. You're still growing with me.'" She let the words settle before continuing. "If you want to share who your tree is for, you can. If not, that's okay too. What matters is the planting." One by one, the children stepped forward. Leo's counselor helped him sign for Grandpa, who read me stories with voices. Maisie waited until the end. Then she stepped into the soft dirt and knelt, gently unwrapping the roots of the dogwood. She glanced once at Graham before beginning to dig. She liked these trees, Maisie said quietly. "Mom," she said, "they bloomed even when nothing else wanted to." Graham's heart clenched. Maisie looked down at the little sapling and pressed her hands around the roots. "I didn't know what to say at her funeral," she said, "so I didn't say anything." Silence. Then she whispered, "This is what I would have said. Thank you, Mom, for staying soft even when things were hard." She stepped back, eyes glassy but steady. Graham swallowed hard. Something inside him cracked and shifted. Pride, grief, awe, all braided into one unbearable, beautiful ache. Later, as the children returned to camp for lunch, Wren lingered in the grove, gently smoothing soil around a few of the newer saplings. Graham stayed too. "She's got your courage," Wren said, not looking up. "I don't feel courageous," Graham replied. "Courage doesn't feel like a victory march," she said. "It feels like standing in a quiet grove, watching your daughter say what you haven't yet found words for." He looked out at the sea of young trees, each holding someone's story. "You've built something remarkable here," he said. "It wasn't mine to begin with," Wren said softly. "It was dreamed up by a friend. Someone who believed there had to be more gentle places in the world. Places where grief wasn't hidden. Where love didn't disappear just because someone did." She stood, brushing her hands clean. "When she passed, I couldn't let it go, so I stayed, watered, waited." Graham nodded slowly. "You kept growing." She looked at him then, a quiet knowing in her eyes. We all do, in our own crooked ways. That evening, Graham and Maisie returned to the grove together, just the two of them. The sun cast golden light across the clearing, turning every leaf into stained glass. Graham carried a small cedar sapling he'd asked Wren for earlier that afternoon. Maisie looked at him curiously. "You're planting one too?" He nodded. "I think it's time." She watched as he dug, hands clumsy but determined. "Who's it for?" she asked. He looked up at her. "For Mom and for me." Maisie tilted her head. "You?" He placed the tree into the soil. "Because I've been stuck, and I think maybe it's time to let something grow again." He paused. "Besides pancakes." She laughed, genuinely, the sound ringing through the trees like chimes. They finished together, patting down the earth and marking the spot with a small wooden tag. Graham wrote, "To Lena, and the man she believed I could become." As they stood back, Maisie slipped her hand into his. "You're getting better at this," she said. "At what?" "Being here." Graham looked out at the trees, dozens of small, stubborn miracles. "I'm learning from the best." The storm rolled in without warning. One moment, the sky was brushed in soft summer blue, and the next it darkened like someone had turned a dimmer switch on the world. The campers were in the middle of an outdoor scavenger hunt when the first drop landed on Wren's clipboard. Within minutes, thunder rumbled like distant drums, and the pines began to shiver. "All right, everyone," Wren called out, her voice clear but calm. "Time to head back to the lodge. Grab your buddy and move quickly, but no running, please." Graham emerged from the trailhead, already jogging toward Maisie and Leo, who were crouched near a log looking for moss. "Let's go, kiddo." Maisie grabbed Leo's hand, and the three of them hurried through the drizzle, feet kicking up pine needles as they went. By the time they reached the lodge, rain was coming down in earnest. Sheets of it, hammering the roof and coating the windows in a blur of silver. Inside, the camp buzzed with activity. Kids drying off with towels, counselors lighting lanterns, the smell of damp clothes and cocoa already mingling in the air. Graham stood just inside the door, water dripping from his sleeves. That came out of nowhere. Wren handed him a towel. "We call it August's surprise. It usually lasts an hour, 2 if it's feeling dramatic." He chuckled, then gestured toward the organized chaos around them. "What now? Sing-alongs and trust falls?" She grinned. "Not quite. We do rainy day journaling in the lodge, fireside tea, maybe stories if we're lucky." She hesitated. "There's a quieter room at the back if you want to dry off. Fewer small feet. Lead the way." The back room was tucked behind the library shelves, a little reading nook with oversized cushions, a soft lighting, and a wood-burning stove that crackled with warmth. Graham shrugged off his damp hoodie, sat on a beanbag that complained under his weight, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Wren joined him with 2 mugs of chamomile tea, her own hair damp and curling slightly at the edges. For a while, they said nothing, just listened to the fire, the rhythm of rain on the tin roof, and the occasional giggle drifting in from the lodge. Then Graham said quietly, "Maisie wrote in her journal last night." Wren raised an eyebrow. "She never does that, not even for school." "What did she write?" He smiled faintly. "I don't know. She just told me she wanted to write, and that it felt nice." Wren cradled her mug in both hands. "Sometimes the most important part of healing isn't saying it. It's just knowing there's a place to say it when you're ready." He nodded slowly. "I think she's found that place." They sat in thoughtful silence, the kind that now felt familiar between them, comfortable, safe. Graham finally said, "I thought I came here for Maisie, to help her. And now? I think she brought me," he admitted, like she knew I needed something I couldn't name. Wren looked at him with a softness that made his throat tighten. She probably did. Children sense things we're too busy to notice. The fire popped, sending a small spray of sparks behind the grate. Graham leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You ever wonder if it's okay to feel good again after losing someone?" Wren didn't answer right away. She took a slow sip of tea, then said, "I used to feel guilty when I laughed, like it was betrayal, as if joy meant I loved him less." He watched her carefully. "But it doesn't. No, it means I remembered how he made me feel, how I used to laugh when he teased me or danced terribly in our kitchen. That's the memory honoring him, not erasing him." Graham closed his eyes briefly. Lena made the worst lasagna, burned the corners every time, but she insisted on baking it anyway. It was like a family ritual. Wren smiled. "I bet you miss those corners now." He opened his eyes, looked directly at her. "More than I ever thought possible." Their eyes locked, and something shifted, something unspoken but deeply understood. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. 2 people who had walked through fire and still had the courage to sit beside it again. The rain lightened. The lodge grew quieter as kids settled into crafts and books, but Graham and Wren stayed in the reading nook, their tea cooling between them. Wren finally broke the silence. "There's something strange about grief." "How so?" "It teaches you to hold joy more carefully, like it's glass." He considered that. "Maybe that's what we're doing here." She tilted her head, holding joy, carefully, not all at once, but in pieces. Wren smiled. Then we're in the right place. Later, as Graham returned to the main room to check on Maisie, he passed a window and saw the rain had stopped entirely. The world outside looked newly washed. Pine branches heavy with droplets, the air fragrant and clean. He paused and smiled. Not because someone told him to, not because he was supposed to, but because, for the first time in a very long time, it felt like something inside him had finally taken root and begun to grow. The fire pit had been rebuilt that morning, ringed with fresh stones and layered carefully with pine branches, kindling, and logs. By dusk, the smoke curled up like prayer, lazy and fragrant beneath a sky bruised purple and gold. It was the last night of the week-long session. The kindness circle, Wren explained, was tradition. One by one, campers and staff would gather to share a single moment of kindness they had witnessed, received, or offered during their time at Kindred. No pressure, no applause, just the act of speaking truth and letting it land gently in the firelight. Graham sat near the back again, not from reluctance now, but habit. His body was more relaxed. His hands didn't clench into themselves like they used to. He wore a flannel someone had lent him. The sleeves rolled up just enough to look unintentional. Maisie sat up front with Leo. She'd woven a bracelet of dried grass and wildflowers and tied it loosely around her wrist. She looked like someone who had stepped out of silence and decided to stay in the world a little longer. Wren stood by the fire, the wooden heart-shaped stone cupped gently in her hands. "This is not a performance," she said, her voice as steady as the flames. "This is a circle of grace. You don't have to be profound. You just have to be real." She handed the stone to the first camper. A boy spoke of how someone had shared their marshmallows when he forgot his snack. A girl talked about a counselor braiding her hair like her mom used to. Another shared how Leo let him use the green crayon, even though it was his favorite. Each voice fell into the fire like a pebble into water, small but widening in its reach. And then the heart passed to Maisie. She took it with both hands, her posture calm, her eyes fixed on the fire. "My kindness came from Wren," she said softly. Graham blinked, surprised. Maisie continued. "She sat with me on the first day when I didn't talk. She gave me a pencil and just waited, like I was allowed to take up space." Wren's breath caught almost imperceptibly. "She didn't ask me what I missed or what I remembered. She just let me be someone who didn't have to explain." The circle was quiet. Maisie glanced at Wren. It helped. She passed the heart to Leo. After the circle, the fire burned lower. The stars blinked awake above the treetops. Campers trickled back to cabins in ones and twos, their good nights gentle. Some barely whispered. Graham stayed behind, watching embers glow like memory. Wren stood across from him, arms folded loosely, face lit orange in the firelight. "You didn't speak," she said. "I didn't need to," he replied. "Maisie spoke for both of us." Wren nodded, then stepped closer. "I wanted to tell you something earlier, but I wasn't sure if it was mine to share." He looked at her, the openness in his eyes no longer hesitant. "Tell me now." She sat down beside him on the old log bench. The air between them buzzed with heat, not from the fire but from something quieter, something truer. "A few years ago, when this camp almost shut down," she began, "we received an anonymous donation." Graham's brows drew together. Wren went on, her voice quiet. "It came with no name, just a note. Please use this to create a space for children who have nowhere to put their grief. A space where they can breathe again." Graham's breath caught. "We didn't know who sent it," she said, "until I saw Maisie's name on the registration form, and yours." His voice was barely audible. Lena? Wren nodded. It was signed only with a sketch, a dogwood flower. That's why I kept one aside for Maisie, just in case she came. Emotion surged in his chest. Grief and awe and something shimmering underneath, like gratitude passed through the years. She helped build this place, he whispered. She planted the seed, Wren replied. We just kept watering it. Graham looked up at the stars. They were brighter tonight, or maybe he was just noticing them more. Lena's love hadn't vanished. It had multiplied, had rippled outward into this camp, these kids, this moment. He felt a tear slide down his cheek and didn't wipe it away. She always believed in small things making a big difference, he said. Even when she was sick. Wren turned to him. She was right. They sat there, side by side, silence wrapping around them like a soft wool blanket. Finally, Wren reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper, the original note that came with the donation. She handed it to him without a word. Graham unfolded it, hands trembling. A place where kindness grows quietly, like roots beneath the surface, where grief can rest, where children can remember joy without guilt. Please don't name it after me. Just make it beautiful. There was no signature, just the inked drawing of a single dogwood bloom. He looked at Wren, his voice thick. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, she said. Not then. But I thought, maybe now. He held the note against his chest for a long time, and when he finally stood, he didn't walk away. He reached for Wren's hand. The morning after the campfire, the light broke through the trees softer than usual, filtered and golden, like it understood something important had shifted in the night. Graham woke early, not from habit or restlessness, but from something deeper, a kind of peace that felt unfamiliar, like muscle memory returning after years of stillness. He sat up on the cot in the staff cabin, stared at the pine-paneled ceiling for a moment, and allowed himself the rarest of things. A slow smile. Then he rose, dressed, and slipped outside into the hush of morning mist. He found Wren in the garden, behind the craft shed, kneeling beside a cluster of wild mint. She wore a faded hoodie and dirt-smudged jeans, her hands in the soil like they belonged there. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and the warmth in her smile nearly knocked the wind out of him. Good morning, she said. Is it? She tilted her head. I'd say so. He crouched beside her. Do you always start your mornings in the dirt? Only the good ones. She handed him a trowel. He didn't ask questions. They worked side by side for several minutes, pulling weeds and replanting mint into neat, uneven rows. Finally, Graham spoke. Maisie told me something this morning. Wren glanced over, curious. She said she wants to come back next summer, not just to draw or hike, but to help, to give something back. Wren's eyes softened. That's how you know a place has done its job. He nodded slowly. She told me she thinks this place is where you go when you're too sad to keep pretending you're okay. He exhaled, and she said I was pretending for a long time. Wren set her trowel down gently. She's not wrong. Graham looked at her. I think I forgot how to be anything else. She didn't rush to reassure him, didn't try to patch the truth. Instead, she leaned back on her heels and said, Then maybe this is where you remember. Later that afternoon, Graham wandered into the lodge's small archives room, a quiet, cedar-scented nook filled with old newsletters, camper drawings, and handwritten stories stored in leather-bound binders. He wasn't sure what pulled him there, only that something inside him needed to know, to trace the threads of Lena's generosity through the roots of this place. It didn't take long. In a dusty binder marked Year 1, the founding summer. He found a page that made his breath catch. It was a scanned thank you letter, written in Wren's familiar handwriting. To the anonymous donor who gave us the seed money to start Kindred Camp, we may never know your name, but your kindness has a face. It lives in every child who cried safely this week, in every counselor who held silence with respect, in every tree planted with trembling hands. You gave us more than money. You gave us a beginning. With gratitude, Wren Callahan. And beside the letter, a photograph. It showed Wren and a few staff members standing in front of the very first cabin built on the grounds, newer, brighter, and unmistakably hopeful. In the corner of the frame, almost hidden behind a post, was a woman Graham hadn't expected to see. Lena, young, her hair wrapped in a red bandana, a clipboard in her hand, smiling at something off camera. Unposed, candid, radiant. The breath left his lungs. She had been here, not just in spirit, not just through a donation, but present, physically, years ago. Before her diagnosis, before the storm, before he ever knew this place existed. He touched the photo gently. It was never just a coincidence. That evening, Graham asked Wren if they could return to the memory grove. She nodded without question, and they walked there in the golden hour light, past waving grasses and the quiet whisper of wind in the pine boughs. Maisie had chosen to stay behind, to work on something, she'd said, vague but content. The grove was still, bathed in amber sunlight. The trees were motionless, like they were listening. Graham stood before the cedar he and Maisie had planted days earlier. "I found her," he said softly, "in a photo, with you." Wren stood beside him, not surprised. She came out for a weekend that first summer, quietly, no fanfare, just showed up with notebooks and questions and a dogwood sapling in her back seat. "She never told me," he said. Wren glanced up at the branches. "Some seeds we plant without expecting to see them grow." He took a deep breath. "I think maybe I'm ready to keep growing too." Her hand found his. They stood there side by side, shadows long behind them, hearts stretched gently toward the light. Later that night, back at the cabin, Graham found something tucked into his cot, a folded piece of paper in Maisie's handwriting. "Dear Dad, I know you didn't mean to send me here, but maybe Mom helped you click the wrong button, because this is the right place. You smile more here, you talk slower. You even made pancakes that didn't taste like bricks. I like you here. I think Mom would too. Love, Maisie." He sat down slowly, paper trembling in his hands. He didn't cry, but he felt the tears anyway, quiet and grateful. And when he looked up, he didn't see the shadows anymore. He saw the path, and the next step forward. 1 week after returning home from Kindred Camp, Graham Adler stood barefoot in his backyard, holding a small apple tree in his hands. The roots were wrapped in burlap, the branches bare except for a modest scattering of green leaves. It was nothing special to look at least not yet, but Graham couldn't stop staring at it like it held something sacred, because in a way, it did. Maisie sat cross-legged on a nearby patio chair, sketchpad in her lap, a glass of lemonade sweating beside her. She had insisted on choosing the spot for the tree. "Here," she said, pointing to a patch of lawn by the fence. "Where the afternoon sun hits, it'll like that." Graham nodded, letting her words guide him. She was her mother's daughter, through and through, gentle, observant, quiet, but firm when it mattered. He knelt and began to dig. The physical labor of planting reminded Graham of kindred, the soft resistance of the earth, the smell of damp soil, the way silence made space for meaning. But this time, he wasn't surrounded by grieving children or watched by counselors holding space for sorrow. This time, It was just him, Maisie, and a memory of someone who'd loved them both in different but permanent ways. When the hole was deep enough, he lowered the sapling into the ground. Maisie stood and brought him the small wooden tag they'd made together at camp. He read the inscription out loud. To Lena, and the home she still grows in us. He pressed the tag into the soil beside the tree and sat back, wiping his hands on his jeans. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The breeze rustled through the fence vines. A bird called out somewhere overhead. Then Maisie spoke. Do you think she'd be proud of us? Graham looked at her. I don't think she ever stopped. Maisie gave a small smile, then returned to her sketch pad. I'm drawing this tree every week, she said. I want to watch it change. He felt a warmth settle in his chest. I think she'd like that. That evening, Graham stood at the stove making dinner. Real dinner, not microwaved, not reheated, not taken from a box. He had music playing. Fleetwood Mac, of course. The same song Lena used to butcher while she danced barefoot across the kitchen tiles. Maisie sat at the counter peeling carrots. She wore one of her mom's old aprons, oversized and stained with time, but it made her smile. I think the sauce needs more oregano, she said, peering into the pot. Graham raised a brow. Since when are you the boss of flavor? Since you burned the last lasagna. Touché. He added the oregano. After dinner, they cleared the table together. Graham was wiping down the counter when Maisie hesitated in the doorway. Dad? Yeah? She glanced down, then back at him. Do you think Wren would ever come visit? He turned to face her, surprised, but not at the question. More at how calmly, naturally it came. She might, he said. Why? Maisie shrugged, but her voice was careful. I just thought it'd be nice. You smile when she's around. Not the small kind, the real kind. He looked at his daughter. This girl who'd been so quiet for so long, now blooming in the way only children who've known loss can bloom. Tender and brave. I'll ask her, he said. Maisie nodded and padded off toward her room. The invitation wasn't fancy. It was a photo of the apple tree, newly planted, with a simple message written on the back in Graham's careful handwriting. The tree is in the ground. Dinner's at 6. You're always welcome. He sent it to the camp's P.O. box, unsure if Wren would be there, unsure if she'd answer. But 2 days later, his phone buzzed with a message. I'll bring pie. W. She arrived on a Friday evening, just as the light was beginning to turn golden. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, a glass dish wrapped in a tea towel balanced in her arms. Maisie ran to greet her with a hug that was no longer shy. This is for the record, Wren said, holding up the pie. I make terrible crusts, but excellent filling. We're a burnt lasagna household, Graham said. You'll fit right in. Dinner was easy. Laughter, stories, the clinking of forks and glasses. Wren told a ridiculous tale about a moose she once had to coax off the camp basketball court with a granola bar. Maisie laughed so hard she snorted lemonade. Afterward, they sat in the backyard, looking out at the apple tree bathed in twilight. Wren leaned in toward Graham. It's beautiful. She chose the spot. She has good instincts. He looked at Wren, the way her face softened in the light, the way her presence made the air feel a little more breathable. Do you ever stop missing them? He asked, voice low. She shook her head. No, but you stop wishing things could go back because you realize they've gone forward in you. He nodded. That's how it feels, like she never really left. She didn't. Maisie came out with her sketch pad. I added the tree, she said, showing them the latest page. It was vibrant. Alive. A little crooked, but reaching toward the sky. Underneath, she'd written in pencil, things grow again, even hearts. Wren smiled at Graham, and this time he didn't just smile back. He reached for her hand and held it. A year later, the sun rose over Kindred Camp just as it always had, draping the pine trees in soft amber light, slipping through cabin windows, and brushing the lake into silver. But something was different. There were more trees now. The memory grove had grown, not just in saplings but in stories, in quiet courage, in children who came with heaviness and left a little lighter. Some trees still bore tiny hands tied with yarn bracelets or heart-shaped notes sealed in plastic. Some stood unmarked, silently bearing witness. And beneath one young apple tree near the fence line, Maisie Adler knelt on the soft ground, her sketchbook resting on her knees. She was 11 now, taller, surer, her hair tucked behind one ear with a pencil she never seemed to part with. Her strokes were bolder, her lines more certain. She was sketching the tree she and her father had planted the summer before. It had grown a full foot, its branches reaching outward like it had decided, finally, to take up space. Behind her, Graham stood holding a thermos of coffee in one hand and a paper bag in the other. "Breakfast delivery," he said. Maisie turned and grinned. "You made scones?" "Kind of. They're more like slightly confused biscuits." She laughed, the sound spilling freely into the morning air. Wren appeared a moment later, brushing pine needles off her jacket. She walked straight to Graham and kissed him on the cheek, easy and familiar. They shared a smile that didn't need explanation. Together, the three of them sat beneath the apple tree. There were no big announcements, no declarations, just warmth, just presence. That weekend, Kindred held its annual Open Grove Day, a tradition Wren had started after the 10th anniversary of the camp. It was a time for former campers and their families to return, to visit their trees, and to walk the grounds that had once held their sadness and turned it into something rooted and real. The lodge buzzed with old stories and familiar faces. Children ran barefoot through the grass. Parents stood in quiet groups near the fire pit, cups of cider in hand, not speaking of grief, but of growth. Maisie guided visitors through the grove with Leo, now 12, and proudly volunteering as an assistant counselor. Together, they told stories not just of who the trees were for, but who had planted them, what they had carried, and how they had changed. "This one," Maisie said, pointing to a tall pine, "was planted by a boy named Sam. He said he missed his sister's laugh. And this one," Leo signed with a smile, "was mine." Graham watched them from a distance and felt something expand in his chest. Not grief, not pride alone, but something more enduring, continuity. Hope that didn't demand anything loud or perfect. Just roots. Just care. Just the quiet miracle of staying. Inside the lodge, a display table had been set up with memory pages, handwritten notes and photos contributed by past campers and families. Graham wandered past the displays slowly, reading the dedications, feeling the presence of 1,000 invisible threads. Then he saw it. A framed photo? Lena, her red bandana. That first summer. Smiling as she helped Wren carry gardening supplies toward a plot of empty land that would one day become the Memory Grove. And beneath the photo, a quote in her handwriting, "We don't heal by forgetting. We heal by remembering together." Graham stood there a long time, hands in his pockets, heart steady, not broken, not heavy, full. Wren came to stand beside him. "She's been here every summer," she said quietly, "in the laughter, in the trees, in the way you and Maisie look at each other now." Graham nodded. "She would have loved you." Wren smiled. "I think she already does." That evening, the camp hosted a final gathering around the fire pit. No official circle this time, just open flames, blankets, cocoa, and an invitation for anyone who wished to speak. Maisie stood up first. This place taught me that people don't leave when they die. They leave pieces behind, in recipes, in songs, in trees, and in people who remember them kindly. There was a pause. Also, my dad's lasagna is finally edible. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Graham stood next. I used to think the bravest thing I ever did was hold my wife's hand through her final breath, he said. But it turns out it's harder to keep living with your heart open, to let love come back in, to let kindness sit down at your table and stay a while. He looked at Wren, then at Maisie. Thank you for helping me do that. And with that, he sat down again. No applause, just warmth, just grace. Long after the fire burned low, Graham, Wren, and Maisie walked back toward the grove one last time. The moon was bright, casting silver across the trees like a quiet blessing. Maisie reached out and touched the apple tree's trunk. One day it'll have fruit, she said. Wren smiled. That's what happens when something roots deeply. Graham took both their hands in his, and in that moment, there was no past too heavy, no future too uncertain. There was only this: a man who had learned how to stay, a woman who had learned how to open her heart again, and a child who had never stopped believing that kindness could still bloom, no matter what had been lost. The wind whispered gently through the branches above, and somewhere, in a world we cannot always see, kindness stayed, and grew, and stayed again. If this story touched your heart in any way, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share what moment stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy stories that gently remind us of the goodness still left in the world, consider subscribing to our channel. It's completely free, and it helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories of kindness, hope, and second chances. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending time with us today. We're so grateful you're here, and remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness plants the biggest tree. Until next time.